get the awful thing out early is my hill to die on.
If you don't understand who you're designing for, you don't understand what their frustrations are, you don't know what the opportunities are that exist, you're going to go into designing something on a whim, and that's incredibly dangerous.
That's a weird hill to die on, but at least you're dead. So. Hi, I'm Chris Cooke.
And hello, I'm Kit Friend. Welcome to Designing Teams, a podcast drafted together by Chris Cooke of CollabSoft and me, Kit Friend of Accenture's Atlassian Partnership team. We'll get a backstage look at the world's most daring and innovative companies. Through candid conversations with creative legends, we explore how designers really work in teams, beyond the wireframes and workflows, to spark ideas, build momentum, and co-create magic. Expect tales of triumph, creative tension, beautifully messy collaboration, and a dash of flamingo-based estimation. Whether you're a designer, a team lead, or just wondering what happens when art meets agile.
Get ready, this is about to get messy. Gentlemen, how's it going?
Very good, mate. Very good. Nice to
Lovely to be here.
Do a round of introductions, I suppose.
Yeah, so myself, Damon, I've been with Accenture 2 years now. Been doing UX, UI design for about 10 years. Joined Accenture from an acquisition called Born Digital. We do a lot of SAP work, and we got acquired about roughly 2 years ago, and now I'm with Accenture, and that's my background.
Damon's one of my colleagues, which is why I have enjoyed speaking to him previously and thought would be a great guest for our first edition of this podcast. I've been with Accenture 15 years, but before I was a designer, so I'm a reformed designer, or whichever way around you want to kind of take it. So looking forward to feeling like I can make myself vaguely more authentic by talking to folks like Damon as part of this series.
And we've done plenty of that at the pub, haven't we? So that's been good.
Yeah. I basically picked Damon as our initial guest for these kind of chats to extend upon things that we've done in minor forays into discussion whilst looking at the Brisbane River mainly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Appreciate you reaching out, Damon, and agreeing to do this. You said you wanted to discuss human-centered design. So I suppose my first question as a knowledgeable and well-rehearsed host is, what is human-centered design?
Yeah, I mean, it's been sort of a term that's existed for a while, but for non-designers, it's really just thinking about, who is the human, I should say, that we're designing for. What are their goals? What are their frustrations? What's the context? What are all the constraints? These are the people that are going to be using the product that we're typically designing for, whether that's an app, a website, you name it. We're just trying to solve the right problems for them, right? So instead of taking, the client-first approach, it's really taking a human user approach first. Like, who are they, and what are they going to be doing with the platform that we're designing for? So ultimately in Agile, where there's, pressure to deliver fast, human-centered design helps ensure that we're not just building the right thing. It's about efficiency and it's about effectiveness ultimately. And if you take a human-centered approach and you interview these people, you use the test with people, you're basically making sure that they're okay with the product that you're designing. And ultimately, if they're happy, the business is going to be happy. And that's really what human-centered design's about.
This is where Kit disagrees with you and you guys fight. So.
Kit, go for it.
It's a funny one, right? Because I remember when I encountered design thinking, of which the double diamond is like a cornerstone, right? Having joined Accenture from a background of art and design. So I was a freelance graphic designer. I did special effects and things whilst I was at an art college in the UK. I found it sort of vaguely amusing that people had sort of imported some of these concepts, but via a weird corporate lens in these tech teams. Now there is there. So like the need to insert a human-centered and these terms around things. It's like, if you were a furniture maker, you would just do this, right? You would obviously make sure that the chair worked for someone to sit on it. But it feels funny that as the software and technology industry has grown up, they've drifted away from the actual people clicking and using the things to the extent where you have to forcibly remind them to make sure that those people are ultimately who are going to judge or use the thing, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, I don't know if I disagree with it, although it's fun to kind of poke things out. But it's interesting that there's industries where you need to remind the people that the humans exist versus the ones where they're that much more immediate and you can't get away from them.
That's right. And often, like, as we know, Kit, like the client will like, we're building this, right? And they might skip, and I'll talk about the double diamond, the first quadrant of the double diamond, which is discovery, like really interviewing the people that we're building for, and understanding, framing the problem. They typically like to skip the discovery and defining what it is that we're actually building. And because of that, like they really just say, look, we're building this, and they want to go straight into Figma and designing and then handing over to development, right? And they really skip over like the crux of what we're trying to do, which is the human-centered design part of it, which is discovering exactly what it is. What is the problem? Like, what are we solving for? And I think, yeah, typically that does get missed, but more and more as Agile, matures, they're really starting to understand that, that's going to cost a lot more money down the line, and you're really just going to miss a lot of the pain points, frustrations, opportunities that exist when you actually talk to the customers that are using the product.
Well, that was my first thought when I heard human-centered design, as opposed to what? Like, what are the alternatives?
Right. Well, I mean, Kit, you're the agile genius here. You can talk about waterfall. You can talk about all the old ways of working. What is agile, do you think? Like, I mean, it's an iterative approach that we take where we really involve everyone. In what I do, it's about involving developers, BAs, product managers, product owners into an iterative sort of design. I like to use the double diamond, but maybe Kit, you can talk about the stuff that people are using outside of agile that is an old way of working, that sometimes misses the mark.
Yeah, and it's a funny one. If we go back to the history of the double diamond, so I had to look this up the other day for a different chat I was on, and it was originally the UK Design Council that popularised it. Although you've got to be careful to say invented, because there's loads of places it comes from, and there's a few versions as well. But they all had this core of like, start with your guess or start where you want to do things. Diverge, try lots of things out, and then converge to pick things a couple of times in the kind of sequence of stuff. And then the typical sort of projects that Damon and I are talking about, where you start from is an interesting question. I think like speaks to that last thing you were talking about, Damon. And the thing is that the place where you start, so in traditional design and product design and creativity, it'll often come from a genuine human problem. Like someone needs a chair to go in their lounge, someone finds something uncomfortable to use ergonomically. Now, the reality is that in lots of technology projects, the original point to start from is frequently a highly paid person in the organization saying to do something. And that's where the problem begins from my perspective on things generally. And the prompt to do stuff begins quite far away from the users and can often be from like a business strategy perspective, or even like a technological driver. So if we think about at the moment, everyone's telling their staff to do AI, right? They're saying, do Gen AI things, do AI stuff. And that's really far removed from the people who are actually going to have a benefit from it, right? You're starting from whizzy, exciting technology and then going make stuff with it. And it's quite far down the process, if you're not careful, you actually go, is that of value to my staff or the customers afterwards? And so this whole human-centered design thing becomes really important there, because it's like, how early in the process do you go, why? Around these things, why must we do AI? And I think that's the really interesting one from my perspective, because if you don't do that, you end up with like one senior person's view of what the right thing is to do in the organization without being grounded and get feedback.
That's 100% correct, right? Like that is, that's what people are saying. It's like, we want Gen AI, we want AI embedded in every aspect of our product, et cetera, et cetera. But when you start mapping that, right, along the customer journey of how they interact with the product, company, app, whatever it is that we're designing, and you start sort of saying, well, yeah, you could have an AI bot to answer your customer questions and, handle whatever task it is that they're trying to complete. But when you actually start putting that up and in front of customers and saying, well, is this going to actually make it easier for you? You won't know that until you start doing that discovery work, which again, when we talk about the double diamond, that's the discovery define quadrant of. So think of the double diamond as two diamonds stacked next to each other. The first diamond is discover, define, which is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, which is really framing the problem, discovering what it is that you're trying to do. And then the second diamond is basically deliver, right? Like it's delivering what it is, building the UI, building the chatbot, if it is an AI chatbot, and then like delivering that and handing it over to developers. But sometimes you might find when it comes to AI, it's not actually solving the problem. So you really need to map those journeys and actually, before you get into the build and design phase, to make sure that you're actually solving a problem. And I think they do sometimes skip over that. And that's where it gets a bit hazy when it says, well, we need budget to do this discovery work, so that we don't just go build something they don't need, actually.
Yeah, as a late adopting Luddite of the AI revolution, I often find that it's been built into apps without considering my needs. I think the first thing I do whenever I open up a piece of software and it goes, here's our new AI tool, is like, how do I close this AI tool? Right?
Exactly.
The option
right. Yeah. And we all have that experience, right? We all have that experience. I mean, obviously, AI has come a long way when it comes to, customer service, but it's still irritating where if you get stuck in a loop with something, you're like, how do I get out of this? I just want to talk to someone. And that's where it can become quite difficult. Businesses, they want to cut down on customer service, sure, but if people are going to get pissed off when they start interacting with your platform, they're not coming back. So yeah, it's something to think about.
And we've jumped into AI with like less than 10 minutes on the clock, as is mandatory in 2025, right? But honestly, if it's not AI, it's something else, right? We could have been having the same conversation about cloud 3, 5, however many years ago you pick, or AWS or whatever. So I think that the common factor is this, like, don't think about the shiny, think about the people that are going to buy the shiny or use the shiny thing, right? I remember my favorite example of this is just like looking at how people use multivariate testing or A/B testing in projects to validate their kind of guesses around things. And I remember working with one organization who had a really good data science team, but they were data scientists. And so they loved doing exciting things with data. And so they defined this idea for personalizing the entire homepage of this organization. And someone, bless them, and I'm so glad they did this because it makes a terrible story otherwise. They said, hang on, before we do all the real work to totally revamp this entire product, which will take like 6 months, even with a super whizzy agile team, let's just check whether people actually want it personalized. And so they did a multivariate test where they redirected a tiny proportion of the audience, of something like 0.5%, to like a kind of scrappy personalized version, just to see whether the humans really enjoyed this hypothesis that the data science had created. And of course, the real humans, when you gave them this hyper personalized experience, hated it. They were like, it's super creepy. I don't like that you've clearly been observing me and like gathering my data and doing things. And they just wanted something very basic, like a most popular kind of count around things. And so that team didn't build the shiny after that experiment. They went back to the next thing. And I think that whole kind of shortening of the loop to feedback, like Damon was saying around things, that's where the magic is to this thing. Because
absolutely, yeah. And you save yourself a lot of heartache down the line, right? When you've built something that, okay, so these data scientists are like, oh, this is super cool, but in reality, when you get the people, the humans that are actually going to be using this, they're like, what is this? Doesn't make sense. Like, I don't want to use this. Very, very important, and gets missed.
I'm curious, Damon, like, how have you got the human earlier into the cycle in some of your projects and experiences? Because it can be a challenge, right? And people get very excited with prototyping and things. But like, how do you get that input in early?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I try, like, because a lot of this stuff happens pre-sprint, right? Like they want you to come, locked and loaded with screens and like, let's start designing. But in actuality, like, you just don't. Like, it's so risky. So a lot of that, I try to advocate for getting in early with, subject matter experts, number one, with the business that we're working with. But usually if I can get a hold of the actual end users that are going to be using the product, I try to interview them before we even get into any design work, right? And what that could look like is, interviews with like select end users that they have that might fit different persona buckets, which I can talk about later, in terms of like, who are they, what are their needs, what are their frustrations, their pain points. And I'll do that discovery work. Again, that's that first quadrant of the double diamond, so that we really know what is actually going on in terms of what we're solving for, what their pain points are, and then we can look at the opportunities and whether that feeds into what it is that we're creating. So yeah, it's I call it desktop research in a sense, because it's pre-sprint work that you have to do to get ready for the work that's actually going to be done. So yeah, there's that. I might do surveys. I might do, I don't know. I might even do like pre-sprint workshops with clients and developers, and if I can do that as well before getting into any work, really to build that rapport with them, but also to get them to understand, like, these are real people that you're designing for. So yeah, I fight for that. It's really that discovery piece.
Is the key then during discovery to make sure you tap the right people with the right roles and the right skill sets before? Because I can imagine as soon as you get the developers in, they're going to want to develop, right? Data scientists are going to want a data science. So is it really just a case of making sure the right people are teed up first? And as you say, calling it a pre-sprint. So letting people know you're not running yet. Stop.
That's right. Yeah. But it can happen, it can happen. It's an iterative thing, right? Like, it can happen when sprints are in place, but really you want to be sort of ahead of the curve, I should say. Right. Like, you're doing this discovery, beforehand, for the designs, if you can do it. But yes, it is like it happens before meeting with developers. Obviously, whatever comes out of opportunities that you have with the SMEs or the end users, you want to put that with developers and see if it's even feasible, right? But before you talk to developers and BAs, you want to really understand who these people are, right? You've probably heard the term persona. Just like a brief explanation of what that is. It's like, who is this person? What's their background? What's the scenario that they typically have coming into using this product? What are their needs, frustrations? What is the blue sky? If I could, wave a magic wand, like, if I could solve all your problems, like, how could I make your task easier, right? And then you would come into that pre-sprint or workshops with devs and BAs and just say, look, these are the people that we're designing for. Here are the scenarios in which they're interacting with your product. And then getting them to really understand that, because often they just say, I don't want to look at personas. This is just design, crap that I don't want to look at. But in reality, like, when they start working these workshops, they go, oh yeah, you're right. That is a frustration, and that does align with this opportunity. So it's like bringing them along the journey. It just makes it a lot easier down the line.
Yeah, I push this with marketing as well as product, is that, like, if you try and be everything for everyone, you are nothing for no one. And just excelling in a niche, focusing, doubling down on that is really, really valuable.
I find that the most interesting personas and the most useful ones aren't the ones that everyone wants them to be, though. Because I feel like when people, especially if you go like to your marketing or your business strategy people that Chris was talking about, when they pick the personas, they'll always pick the exciting early adopters flashing the cash and things.
Right.
And and especially if you're delivering, I guess Damon and I will often work on fairly high or large scale digital product or physical products sometimes, and the breadth of your real audience is not like the exciting jazzy early adopters with the latest iPhone, right? And I remember I really enjoyed working with a gentleman called Colin Phillips at BT a while back. We worked on BT Sport. And he always, I think her name was Mrs. Goggins. He had this fictional persona that he would always talk about when we were designing for things. And you instantly knew what he was talking about. And Mrs. Goggins, we all knew, she lived in a village in the middle of the countryside somewhere with terrible connectivity. And her house was full of mesh in the walls, and she wasn't very good at using technology. And she was the key user to make sure that we could kind of satisfy it. And it was interesting, even just that exercise of having some shorthand and thinking about that imaginary person rather than the jazzy geek who wants to kind of like adopt things early with new devices.
It's 100% interesting though too, because I've worked on so many projects where you have these personas and then you're creating these giant journey maps of like how these people are interacting, each touch point along, end to end journey from like interacting through to are they satisfied and are they coming back for more? And yeah, sometimes these giant journey maps just get stuck up on a wall, or they end up living in some file at the client's on the client's desktop or whatever cloud, and they forget about it. But then they tend to miss out on a lot of like really, really good opportunities because they forget about it. And our job as human-centered designers is to really like keep that front and center and just say, hey guys, like we're talking about something that we already identified like 6 months ago, and we know this. Like, why are we talking about this? We know what the opportunity is. We know what the pain points are, but you seem to have forgotten that. So you have to keep reminding them like about that.
So how do you do that? Because you said at the start, everyone's busy, everyone's in a rush, lots of competing priorities, and lots of expensive resources. People want to deliver quickly. So how do you stop design from getting squeezed out during this agile delivery?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a common issue, and we have to fight for it. I tend to work as close as I can with project managers to create like design spikes, right? And like it's about telling a narrative, right? Like, and just say, reminding people, whether you're using a PowerPoint, just say, look, this is the problem we're trying to solve. Here's a bunch of design debt that we have, which is, design debt is just another word for saying, the stuff that needs to be designed that's sitting in the backlog that we need to get to, and really just kind of like coming to them with this and just saying, look, we know that this is something that needs to be done. We know we've already done the discovery research, right? We've talked to users. This is what they want because this part of your product has all these pain points, and here's an opportunity to solve that. We've done the user testing, and we just kind of explain that narrative so we can bring actual research and insights, whether it's data, to say, this is why we're doing this, right? You always, and again, it comes down to the audience. But if you're working closely with PMs and developers and stakeholders, and you can build that rapport, it won't get squeezed out because they know that if they don't address this, it's going to be a problem down the line. And often the design that we do will inform the roadmap as well. So yeah, that's how I do it.
I love that there's design debt. I feel like every discipline has their own version of debt that people talk about.
That's right. Yeah.
I often have process debt or tooling configuration debt. You've got design debt, there's tech debt, all those things. I feel like for me, it's really interesting in that every time I see an organization with frustrated designers and people like Damon kind of like tearing their hair out, there's always weakness in the product management kind of layer as well, because you've got to have those people to sort of fight for the balance quite close to the products and teams and name things and go like, I will champion the need for good design and UX.
That's 100% right. You need advocates within, it can't just be, as you mentioned, Kit, like designers pulling their hair out and saying, stamping like, we have to get this done. No, the product manager needs to know why this has to be done. And we have to come with them with like, data to back it up, because that's what they love, right? They want to know, is this going to cost us money, or is this going to make us money at the end of the day? So that's a big one.
And we talk about the designers as like omnipotent people who are always correct. I mean, I'm interested, like, do you find designers being wrong and like over polishing things ever, Damon, and kind of need to be wrong back?
Oh, right. Yes, that happens. I mean, absolutely, it happens. Which is true of any role, really. Like developers get stuff wrong, project managers get stuff wrong, stakeholders get stuff wrong.
I want a failure story. I always like a failure story.
Oh God, what's a good failure story? Without getting into specifics, because I know this is a podcast. I mean, it's typically like, so I come from that UX background where I actually studied psychology, and I'm really about human behavior and how people think and how they interact with the products that they're using. Whereas a lot of the UX UI designers in the field that I've come across, they come from that graphical design background, right? So they're about, making things aesthetically beautiful and decorative, right? So that is great, but they miss out, and often it's not their fault all the time, but often there's no budget to go do user testing with this product that they've made all pretty and beautiful and luscious to look at, right? So typically that's where it starts to get into issues where they've created this decorative masterpiece, but it hasn't been user tested. They haven't put it in front of users at all. And they build it, and then they wonder why there's issues because they haven't aligned things correctly, and it's just beautiful, but it's unusable, right? That'd be a typical story.
I always find it interesting. I think when you go to a pub or a restaurant, if you can find the toilets without having to ask or look for a sign, like I think that's a real quintessential example of good user
That's
experience.
A great one.
Yeah, and you just feel it. You're just like, oh yeah, I just wandered here and there's the facilities I need. But it's one I see done badly so often.
When you ask the staff and before you've said a word, they point towards the toilets, you know that you're like, okay, so this has been a problem for you guys for years and no one's put up a sign, no one's fixed it.
Like the best one to think about, if we're using analogies here, that's a perfect analogy that we've all had that experience walking into a cafe or a bar and it's just like, where's the bathroom? But it's the same at a supermarket, right? Like I'm trying to find something and you just like if you're in a giant supermarket, it can be a nightmare, right? So that's another way.
I have heard that's intentional though, right? That there is some conspiracy theory that they do want you to wander around.
I think that could be true too. They actually have a term for that. It's called dark UX, where they're actually intentionally trying to get you to wander around and hopefully not find the thing you're looking for, but wander across a bunch of other things that you might want to buy, right?
Anyone that struggled to find the unsubscribe button on an email, and then when you finally find it in the middle of a block of text down 3 pages, and they goes, "Are you sure you want to unsubscribe?" You're like, "No, I'm sure."
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that one up because that's very true. So there's for those for listeners that might not understand, that dark UX basically refers to the dark side of UX, which is where we design people to intentionally not be able to do the things that would opt them out of a platform. It can be something that you see a lot, and when you start looking, you're like, oh wow, it's really hard to unsubscribe or deactivate my account. And that could be intentional, right? So there is that other side of things, and it's very interesting that you point that out.
There are entire websites dedicated to helping you find how to cancel subscriptions. So there's walkthroughs because this is like a thing people hate. So you can find.
Oh right, yeah. It's like
first you click here,
then
you click
read
there,
the FAQ,
then you click
right?
there.
Right, read the 10-page FAQ on how to deactivate your account. Right, yep, understood. That's something that we try to avoid. Like those that are on the light side of UX, we don't want to make it difficult. We don't want people shouting at their phone or their laptop or whatever. We want them to be happy. So.
The other one that always springs to mind, it's funny, I saw this mentioned in the Brisbane Times, that world-leading chronicle of journalism that everyone reads earlier this week. They spoke about desire paths, which I don't know if that Damon will have a poster somewhere around these, but Chris might not have encountered before. But this is physical paths in your environment where you see the pavement that the city council has constructed, and then you see worn into the grass where the people actually wanted to go. And I think it's so difficult to try for those up front when you're designing products and doing things, but leaving that room so that you cannot solidify the paths too early in the process and give people space to define what they need. Like that is the secret magic.
That one's so famous, the one that he's talking about. Anyone that Googles UX, it's like, you'll see it'll be a grassy field in front of a building, and there's like there's symmetrical pathways to get from A to B, but then there's the actual path in the grass that's just been worn down by people shortcutting their way to get from A to B, and that's a very good way to think about it. Like that's the way people actually operate versus the way that developers might design things, right? So
and I think that's the benefit of working with experienced people, because if you don't always have the time or the resources to test every assumption, to ask every question, there'll be people that have done a similar thing on a similar project, and for the path example, there will be people that have built enough paths and seen their work ignored by the masses to go, guys, like we should just do it this way.
That's right. And when it comes to I mean, that's why it's always good to. So when with the double diamond, like obviously when you design and deliver something and you've handed it over and developers have created it and then you release it, it doesn't end there, right? Like you still want to be, measuring like how are customers, responding to this. Like so, you'd be following up, and then that will then feed into the next line of inquiry when it comes to, maybe there are some issues that we need to refine, right? So when you release products, you still want to back it up with like how are customers responding, right? And you want to really, that's where you start seeing surveys pop up on websites and like how's your experience? Those annoying customer service. Hey, how did you enjoy this conversation? Can you do a review, right? Like as annoying as those things are, they exist so that we can make things better. But yeah, I think anyone that's listening has experience of that. So
I find it funny that when you get like sort of agile UX diehards like given free rein over something, it's a really interesting test to see whether they stick to their guns on kind of principles. So we've been co-creating a registered Scrum Basics course with Atlassian and Scrum Inc. recently, and it's been the first time in ages I've been able to like be moderately in control of something and when to release it and things. And it's really difficult to stick with your guns and be like, get the crappiest thing we're willing to out there and get some human feedback with things. And you just see everyone go like, oh, but can we have one more picture? Or can we get like one more interaction in? And you've got to be really pushy to go like, no, is it MVP or not? And I find it's even more difficult when we've all got that experience of people are going like, oh, well, you're done. I'll take away the rest of the budget now. Or like, no, you can't iterate anymore. And there's that like fear of like, if I save it till after the launch, they won't let me keep going. They won't let me iterate around things that I think we've all experienced, especially in large organizations.
No, 100%. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like people go, okay, we're released to market. That's it. No, it's not it. Like you need to keep putting your ear to the ground. Like, what are they saying? What do they think? Like, you don't get to a 5 out of 5 app review on, App Store unless you are listening and you actually care about what and how people are interacting with your product. So, yeah, I guess that's a myth. Like, oh, it's released, cool, on to the next thing. Not always. So, yeah.
So I've been long criticizing B2B SaaS, right? And I always say that if business apps if business app vendors made B2C apps for the iPhone, people would immediately uninstall it. Right, the difference in quality of UX is incredible, palpable. Right, if I had to download an app on my phone and it suggested I do a 4-week training course and have to Google video for tutorials on how to use the thing, I would quickly uninstall it from my phone.
Absolutely.
And yet that seems to be the industry standard. So why is the difference? Is it just that there's more money in B2C or there's more people to test it? Have you any insights into why?
Kit, maybe you can answer that one. I mean, ever since Steve Jobs, everything's, again, getting back to that persona description of like, who are these people? Steve Jobs, he designed for the old lady and the 12-year-old, right? Like he had the full spectrum of people that want to be able to use a computer. I think, is it money that they can throw at, I don't know. I'd say the smart ones, as we all know, like the Ubers and the Instagrams and the apps that have been around for like a decade plus. Like these people understand discovery. They understand who they're designing for. They understand every single persona that's interacting with their application or their platform. It might be money. Maybe they have more money to throw it at the human-centered research aspect of understanding those people. I'm not sure. Maybe Kit can answer that.
Yeah, I think there's a few examples. Before we jump into it, I think the Steve Jobs one is always a good one to pause on. And what's really interesting there's two bits that are interesting about Apple for this one thing. The first is that Steve Jobs is not a designer, right? He gets credited with all these design decisions.
He's a marketer.
You pick your role that you want to attribute to him, right? But
right.
I think what's interesting is he was smart enough, and I think the execs at Apple were still smart enough to bring in really good designers. So the genius of Steve Jobs was collaborating with people like Johnny Ive, right, to bring in people who are really smart about the design. And then he makes a difficult business decision, sure, around those things. But he didn't invent the click wheel or kind of those things. But the bit that really makes me think of this is I remember I was at the right vintage that the iPhone came in whilst I was in my first kind of semi-normal kind of job post-university. And before that, everyone was on these horrendous like WAP-enabled phones with weird slidey keyboards and the stuff and
Got
things.
the Blueberries as well. I remember the Blueberries. My God.
Blueberries? Was there Blueberries as well as Blackberries? There was all these terrible devices and
the
things.
Blackberries. Sorry.
Yeah, from different. There's probably a Blueberry as well. The Temu of the business phone. Okay, but I think what was really interesting was at the beginning of the iPhone coming in, no corporate business would support them. There was like this, like, oh, that's your personal device. We'll support this very proprietary, weird hardware that has these standards in, and they just got forced to adopt the iPhone within like 12 months or maybe less.
It happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And actually, sorry to get back to your because I'm really starting to think about it now. I think it was like as of 2012, 2013 when everyone started having an iPhone or a smartphone, if you will, and it went like I remember looking. I roughly started my career back in 2014. It would have been. And they would put graphs up on like the statistics of people that are using, a desktop computer or a laptop versus a phone. And it used to be like, oh, everyone's on a computer, but like over the years, the phone just kind of like everyone is now on a phone. So I think knowing that the majority of your customers are interacting with your platforms now with a smartphone, they started realizing that if we don't make this easy, we're going to lose business, right? So I think it was that shift of everything going from, pre-2012, people interacting with your website, on a computer to when it became just highly accessible for everyone from teenagers to older adults with smartphones to be able to do everything. Internet banking is a great example. Social media is another great example. But everything became mobile first, right? And that shift has just skyrocketed and continues to skyrocket. I would argue like the amount of people these days don't like. Most people have a phone versus most people. Most people have a phone versus the amount of people that have a laptop, unless you're in the field of tech where you need a laptop, or it's probably. Yeah, I don't know what the percentage is today, but I would say the amount of people on a phone now, that's who you're designing for if you're thinking about the masses.
Mm. And linking it back to the B2C point and B2B, I guess the interesting thing is with the B2C products, that feedback and the opinion of the user has a real impact. I think when people are picking a B2B tool, especially in larger organizations, often that decision is being made by a procurement person or someone in relative isolation from the users without that feeling of the feedback loop closing afterwards. So you're going out and procuring your new ERP system or something, you hand that brief to someone quite high up in the organization, far removed from things. They make a decision based on price or the promise of the features, and then it's committed before you get to that point of iteration and cycling with users. So there's not really like the threat or the impact of making a bad decision around that forces that innovation around things. There's exceptions.
But to get back to like why they pour so much money into B2C, like now even the B2B, like the like I'm working for different mining companies like Rio Tinto and Boomer, and even now they know that most of their employees are out and about in the field with their phone, so they're taking that B2C approach with their employees. Like they want to be able to go and approve purchase orders and invoices quickly on their phone, like they would anything like they do on their phone. Just because they're business people doesn't mean they're not like everyone else that has Instagram and like internet banking and Uber, and like they want it to be that simple. So now they're trying to redesign a lot of their platforms to be mobile first too, just to make it easier for people. So there is that side of things. It's catching up. A common myth about design in agile teams, I could probably answer that. I mean, one myth is that you have to have everything designed up front. I mean, that's a myth, right? Like design's this massive blocker, but in actuality, design's iterative, right? Like you can work with people as you go. And I think that's a common myth. Like even yesterday, I was working with a client, Blue Scope Steel, and we I'm kind of between two projects, and I didn't have all the screens ready, and we just had a 2-hour meeting with developers and the stakeholders and the BA. and we just kind of like riffed on it together for 2 hours, and we kind of came up with some solutions. So the myth is that, is that design upfront is necessary. It's not. You can make it iterative with everyone involved. That would be my myth. I don't know if you got another myth, Kit.
I'll definitely inject in some others, but on that particular one, I'm interested. Like, is it a myth that design is a special skill possessed only by the sacred wizards in one section of society, or is it something that the rest of the team can own?
I will say yes. I'm from the school of thought that everyone's a designer, right? Like, ultimately, I think when you're bringing everyone along for the ride, and I have so much fun working with everyone to come up with the solution. And really, when you take a sort of a bird's eye view looking down on these group of people trying to come to a solution. What is it? They're designing, they're problem solving. So no, I don't think the design, I hate it when a designer, plays that role. It's like, I'm this and you have to follow my direction and I'm not going to work. You don't want to be that. You want to make everyone feel like they're along the journey and they're designing with you. So that's the way I like to work. So no, everyone is a designer in my book, as long as you make it iterative and you work together.
I think
I might wear the designer hat, but I'm not. I try to make it a collaboration.
I find a sort of follow-up related myth is when someone says I can't draw, and it's interesting, right? Because drawing things, visual communication as humans is fairly essential, I think, as part of any sort of design and creation process. And regardless of what it is, I will always ask people, like, can you just sketch me what's in your head, like, around this thing?
Right,
and it's such an essential thing to do. But we educate people out of them feeling confident in doing that. And I'm like, I don't mind if you draw a stick figure. Like, I need to try and understand what you think that this looks like.
Absolutely.
Or how it'll look in your head.
Absolutely. And for anyone that's listening, I've worked with Kit, and he's very good at integrating that. It's almost like a childlike thing that we love, whether it's building Lego or creating, like, it doesn't have to, like you said, it can be stick figures. We don't care. It could just be some dot points you scribble on a Post-it note. The point is, we're getting you thinking, right? We're getting you really thinking about what it is that we're riffing on. And I think, that myth that only I can do that and you guys have to follow my rule it's not true. And the best design is bringing everyone along the journey and making them feel like, I've got this thought and I'm going to put it out there, and that's great. So that's the way I think about it.
It makes me think, and the point of this podcast series is that we want to think about the role of design and designers in teams and how we interact there. I think it's really interesting, the point that you're making. I'm almost seeing in my head like a Venn diagram forming where the designer's circle starts to overlap more with the other roles, circles, and it's more about, so sure your designer is probably the most visually literate person or people and the one that can do things.
Sure.
But they're more an enabler now, where it's like,
like a conductor. Like we are with AI these days. It's like, help me. I can help you, just like you might facilitate a workshop. Like, we're just trying to get, 2 heads is better than 1, right? Like, and if you got like 10 heads in a room, we're going to be able to riff on some really cool designs. I might be the guy that can make it pixel perfect in Figma, but you guys were the ones that got me there, right?
Yeah, really interesting. And within a year, like, the AI is going to be the one that can get a pixel perfect.
Well, that's
Figma,
that's a story for another discussion, which I'm super excited about. But that's we've got to be prepared for that one too.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that designers will continue to be valued for their skill in conducting that process and enabling things.
I think that's what I'm starting to understand. I mean, even the other day, I was playing around with an AI plugin with Figma. And I just prompted, can you build me a screen that have these elements and this and that? And it did it. And it was all, it had auto layout and created components, and it was done. There was just some tweaks I had to make. And I was like, wow, that was pretty impressive. But at the end of the day, you still have to have the knowledge of how UX works in order to conduct that and to make sure that that's something that is usable, right? But yeah, it's scary times. What happens when the AI is then the UX guidance on top of that? It's already happening. So I think we're going to be conducting it. I don't think it's going to squeeze us out just yet, but talk to me in a year's time. We'll see how we go.
I am really interested how the AI can amplify positive UX and design as well, though. So I'm doing lots at the moment where we look at AI as a way to remind people of like architectural standards and regulatory compliance that they need to build in, but it'd be drudgery to get the people to try and remember all those things. I think it'll be interesting, and I don't feel like we're quite there yet around embedding good design necessarily, because it's in some ways more nuanced than things. But I feel like that'll be a really interesting point where when you're coding the feature, your UX bot comes in and goes like, do you remember the last time we did a carousel like that? People didn't like it so much. Maybe you can think about it.
Right. Yeah, and absolutely. Like those tools will become available, no doubt. I mean, I don't know if the reinvention console has that history as well. I don't know. That's something that I've looked at a little bit, but certainly, when we look at accessibility testing and stuff like that, AI is incredible with that already. Like if I, upload a design and get it to do an accessibility test, it's pretty amazing, I have to say. So
I think accessibility is a really exciting area because it's one of those things where it's easy for people to go like, oh, that's too expensive for us to do really thoroughly. What percentage of our users is going to impact? And when you've got tools that can mean that it's a no-brainer to do those kind of checks, and we've now got the ability to do it, I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, and actually designing for accessibility usually makes the design better in the end anyway, because it really factors in, like when you're dealing with people that have to tab through a screen with their keyboard, you often find that people that might be vision impaired that are trying to complete a task is still, if you make it easy for them to tab through to get to their call to action, likely the person that's not vision impaired is going to find that 1,000 times easier now that you've designed for that too. So
and then the app works better if people have like glare on their screen or if they're distracted. So I learned through some accessibility work I was doing in playing Dungeons and Dragons with visually impaired people.
Oh, right. Nice.
These improvements help everyone, right? It made it easier for me. I actually preferred the accessibility mode on a lot of the apps.
Absolutely.
I would love to do a podcast about what Dungeons and Dragons can teach us about accessibility. I feel like there's a good narrative flow around that.
I still have a few chats actually from Everyone Games that you should check out, Kit, on that very topic.
Yeah. But it's my Bible of all these things is the podcast 99% Invisible, and they had a design path episode, but they did another one on curb cuts and just all those examples of where accessible design creates a like halo effect of other improvements that you can't plan for, but it's like, and if we can have a method of accelerating design that creates more of those openings, and you won't know what the benefit is, right? It'll be something surprising, like the way that more people use closed captions now for non-accessibility related reasons than anything else, right? And it changes the way
really interesting, isn't it? How that's kind of changes the way that you interact with something. I've been quite interested in how that changes the way, like captions on podcasts or videos in general. I never thought that would be a thing for people that don't need it, but in actuality, it's actually incredibly helpful. So I did not pick that when that became a thing.
So to wrap things up then, gents, I'd like to hear what's the UX hill you'd like to die on when it comes to working in Agile.
For me, I've already stated it earlier. It's getting that discovery, define quadrant of the double diamond done before you start anything. It's my hill to die on, because if you don't understand who you're designing for, you don't understand what their frustrations are, you don't know what the opportunities are that exist, you're going to go into designing something on a whim, and that's incredibly dangerous. So that would be my thing. Like, interview early, get your subject matter experts, whether it's a client you're working with, make sure that they give you access to people that are going to be using the product. And at the very least, if they can't do that, interview the hell out of them and just try to understand it. But usually, if you're nice to them, they'll give you access. And if you can find out who those people are and you can map that early on, yeah, you're likely going to be able to find out what the problem is that you're solving for much earlier on, and it's going to save you a lot more money down the line. So that would be my hill to die on.
Awesome. Kit, on the same hill or a different one?
Different hill, and they kind of they do overlap, but then they don't overlap. So I actually think not designing too much, and I always talk about MVP being releasing the worst thing that you're willing to real humans to learn something, and I think that get the awful thing out early is my hill to die on. And really good teams will do both. But if I was going to pick one, I'd pick get the worst thing out to some real humans as my hill to die.
Yeah. If we're talking MVP, I guess I was thinking at the very beginning of a project, when you're trying to understand what it is that you're designing. But for sure, MVP, you're going to learn a lot at the end of the day once you release anything. But yeah, if we're talking about the beginning of a project, I think discovery, but discovery happens throughout actually, because that double diamond is recursive. So, yeah.
Have you got a hill, Chris? Or is it a mound that you're piling dirt onto as you gain opinions?
I'm just watching everyone jump on hills and dying around me confused. So that's my current status.
Is this a bit like Dungeons and Dragons again? We're coming.
It's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite replies in the comments to say to someone is, "That's a weird hill to die on, but at least you're dead." So.
I'm the first to charge in. I like the glory of a potentially unfortunate battle.
And just quickly to rein it into the practical, gents, what tools or rituals do you use to embed design into your agile workflows?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. Miro, I use Miro for everything. I'm actually starting to use FigJam, which, if people aren't familiar, it's Figma's version of Miro. It's ultimately just a dumping ground of all your research. It's where I conduct a lot of my workshops. Other rituals, I'm part of Accenture, and one of the joys of being part of a big organization is I have a lot of other UX UI designers that I work with. They might not be on the same projects as me, but we run, I think Google created this, but they're like weekly or fortnightly design critiques, which sometimes you could think of them as brown bags for designers, but I'll take designs that I might be working on and I'll get feedback from those designers and get other input. And it just helps along the line. The other ritual is, like I said it earlier, doing a lot of that pre-discovery work, maybe doing some pre-sprint design workshops with developers and BAs before we even get into sprints and committing to anything. So there's a ton of tools I use, both qualitative and quantitative.
And I guess I'll pick a ritual and a tool. So a ritual or an event or practice. I'm a big fan of Three Amigos as a technique for backlog refinement and work, which is, in a nutshell, is where you get people with three different kind of hats or priorities on. So typically a business person, some kind of maker or technical or delivery person, and someone with the lens of quality or probability on, and you get them to tear apart things as a precursor to the rest of the team looking at it. And I find it really, really interesting for getting those in. And you can use it at different stages. You can use it later as part of quality as well. But I really like it as part of that discovery pre-work element that David's speaking about. And a tool, as we're broadly an Atlassian related podcast, I'm a fan of Jira Product Discovery. And the reason I like that is because often people conflate too much the idea and the shaping of thing with the unit of stuff that eventually gets delivered. And I really like Jira Product Discovery because it provides a space for you to curate the ideas and do this discovery work. That doesn't necessarily mean that the unit of stuff that you're working on discovering at the moment is going to be the same as an epic later or a story later or those things. So those would be my two favourites.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. That's us done.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you guys.
Damon.
Take care. See you, Kit. Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a good